Emma Holmes, a 35-year-old interior designer, had finally achieved her dream of moving out of the bustling city to a serene suburban home. The property, with its spacious yard and cozy layout, promised the tranquility she had long sought. As a freelancer, Emma could work from anywhere, and she envisioned herself spending afternoons on her patio, sketching designs while surrounded by the gentle hum of nature. The yard was her sanctuary, a canvas for the vibrant flowers she had planted, and a place where she could unwind after stressful workdays. Her new home sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, HOA. When Emma moved in, she had been given a thick packet of rules and guidelines, but she had skimmed them, assuming they were standard. She paid her monthly dues promptly and attended one introductory HOA meeting, where the president, Pauline Grant, struck her as sharp and slightly condescending. Pauline welcomed Emma but added a comment about how newcomers often struggle to adjust to the way things work around here. Emma had laughed it off at the time, too busy with unpacking and arranging her new space to give it much thought. Life seemed perfect until the morning it wasn't. Emma woke to the grinding sound of construction equipment. Still groggy, she stumbled to the window and froze. A construction crew was erecting a tall chain-link fence straight through her backyard, cutting off her garden and blocking the entrance to her shed. She rushed outside, barefoot and still in her pajamas, waving her arms at the workers. "What's going on here?" she shouted over the noise of machinery. One of the men, wearing a yellow vest and hard hat, glanced at her and pulled a folded piece of paper from his clipper. "Construction order from the HOA," he said flatly, handing it to her. Emma stared at the document, which declared that a new community walking path was being installed to improve neighborhood accessibility. The proposed path ran directly through her backyard. Emma's heart raced as she read the fine print, which claimed that a portion of her property fell under a newly revised community easement. "This is my yard," Emma said, her voice shaking. "I didn't agree to any of this." The worker shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA." Feeling a mix of anger and confusion, Emma stormed back into her house and dialed the HOA's office number, listed on the paper. After several rings, a receptionist answered with a practiced cheerfulness that grated on Emma's nerves. "Good morning, this is the HOA office. How may I assist you?" Emma quickly explained the situation, her voice rising with frustration. The receptionist placed her on hold, and minutes later, Pauline Grant's cool, controlled voice came through the line. "Emma," Pauline began, as though addressing a child, "the walking path is a community project approved by the board to enhance the neighborhood. It's all outlined in the updated guidelines sent out last month." "I didn't receive any updates," Emma snapped. Pauline's tone hardened. "We're not responsible for individual oversights. Perhaps you should check your mail more diligently." Regardless, the board voted unanimously to approve the project. "It's well within our rights to make these improvements." "Well within your rights?" Emma said, incredulous. "This is my property." Pauline sighed. "That's where you're mistaken. According to the revised lot plans, a portion of your yard falls within the easement designated for community use. You'll find the details in Section 8 of the HOA's governing documents. I suggest you review them carefully." The call ended abruptly, leaving Emma gripping her phone in stunned silence. She had never agreed to an easement, nor had her property documents mentioned one during the purchase process. The sudden invasion of her yard felt like a violation, not only of her rights but of the sanctuary she had worked so hard to create. Emma spent the rest of the day poring over her property documents. Her deed showed no mention of a community easement, and the plans she had reviewed before buying the house clearly defined the entire yard as her private property. Yet when she compared these documents to the one provided by the construction crew, discrepancies leaped out at her. The boundaries on the HOA's map extended into her yard, reassigning a significant portion of it to communal use. Feeling a growing sense of dread, Emma decided to visit the HOA office in person. The building was a nondescript structure tucked between a strip mall and a bank, hardly the imposing headquarters she had imagined for an organization wielding such power. Pauline greeted her in the lobby with a tight smile. "Emma, how nice of you to come," she said, though her tone suggested anything but. Emma held up her property deed. "This shows my entire yard as private property. How can the HOA claim part of it?" Pauline barely glanced at the document before dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "HOA regulations evolve, Emma. When you bought the house, you agreed to comply with all current and future amendments to the bylaws. The board's decision is final." "That's absurd," Emma said. "You can't just take my land." Pauline's smile tightened. "You're free to consult a lawyer if you believe we've overstepped. But I assure you, the HOA operates within the bounds of the law." Emma left the office seething, her mind racing with questions. How could this happen? Was the HOA truly within its rights, or was something more sinister at play? As she walked back to her car, a neighbor she had met briefly, Jeff, waved at her from across the street. She considered approaching him for support but hesitated, unsure of who she could trust. By the time Emma returned home, the fence was nearly complete. The sight of it, cutting through her beloved garden, filled her with a deep sense of loss and determination. She would not let this stand. Emma spent the rest of the evening combing through every document she had on her property. She pulled out the original deed, the inspection reports, and even her purchase agreement. None of them mentioned an easement or community access rights. The more she read, the clearer it became. This land was hers. Yet, the HOA's construction orders and maps told a different story, one that painted her backyard as a shared space. Frustration bubbled inside her as she realized she was being forced into a battle she never signed up for. The next morning, Emma received an official letter from the HOA. It accused her of obstructing community access and claimed that the placement of her garden beds, shed, and patio furniture violated the association's guidelines for easement usage. The letter threatened escalating fines if she didn't comply within 2 weeks by removing all unlawful obstructions. Emma's hands shook as she read the letter. The audacity of it made her blood boil. She immediately called the number listed at the bottom of the page, but after being transferred twice, she was told by the receptionist that Pauline Grant was unavailable. "She's very busy managing this project," the receptionist said with a syrupy tone that made Emma clench her jaw. That evening, Emma decided to try a different approach. She printed out her property documents and knocked on a few neighbors' doors, hoping someone might be willing to offer advice or share similar experiences. The responses were disheartening. Her first stop was an older couple a few houses down. The husband barely opened the door, peeking out with suspicion. "Sorry, miss," he said before she could get 2 sentences out. "We don't want to get involved in HOA matters." The door clicked shut before Emma could reply. At another house, a younger woman with 2 toddlers told Emma she couldn't afford to make waves with the HOA because they were too powerful. Others were polite but distant, clearly unwilling to stand up against the association. Emma's frustration mounted. It wasn't just her yard that was at stake. This HOA had created an atmosphere of fear and compliance. As she walked back home, a neighbor named Jeff flagged her down. He was a lanky man in his 40s who lived across the street and had once borrowed her ladder to clean his gutters. "Hey, Emma," he said, looking around as if to make sure no one was watching. "I heard about the fence. That's rough." "Rough? It's illegal." Emma snapped, though she softened her tone when she saw Jeff's wary expression. "Sorry. It's just I didn't think this kind of thing could actually happen." Jeff rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, Pauline runs this place like her own little fiefdom. Most people here are too scared to cross her. She knows how to make life hell if you step out of line. Do you know anyone else who's had issues with her? Emma asked, eager for allies. Jeff hesitated. There'd been rumors, fines for dumb stuff, threats of foreclosure for late dues. And that walking path, it's not about the neighborhood. Pauline's brother's a developer. He's been trying to buy up land around here for years. Wouldn't be surprised if he's involved somehow. Emma's stomach churned. She thanked Jeff and hurried home, her mind racing. If what Jeff said was true, this wasn't just about a walking path, it was a scheme to seize her property for profit. Determined to dig deeper, Emma began researching HOA laws in her state. To her dismay, she learned that HOAs often wielded significant power, including the ability to impose fines, place lines on properties, and even foreclose on homes for unpaid dues. However, there were limits. HOAs had to follow specific legal procedures when making changes to property boundaries or easements, and Emma was convinced that Pauline had bypassed those procedures. Emma also discovered something that made her pulse quicken. If an HOA acted outside its legal authority, homeowners had the right to challenge their actions in court. She printed out everything she could find, highlighting sections that seemed relevant to her case. The next day, Emma received another unpleasant surprise. Her mailbox was stuffed with HOA notices, duplicates of the first letter, as well as a new one demanding she remove her patio furniture within 48 hours or face an additional $200 fine. She also found a crumpled, unsigned note stuffed inside. "Stop fighting. You'll regret it." Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she read the note. Was someone threatening her? The realization that someone in the neighborhood might be watching her, rooting against her, sent a wave of unease through her. That night, she ordered a set of security cameras online and resolved to install them around her property as soon as they arrived. Despite the tension, Emma refused to back down. She spent hours compiling her evidence, her property documents, screenshots of emails, and even the letter from the HOA. She highlighted discrepancies between her deed and the HOA's revised maps, creating a binder of information she hoped would be enough to challenge their claims. Finally, she managed to get an appointment with a local real estate lawyer, Logan Carter. His office was modest but well organized, and he listened attentively as Emma explained the situation. HOAs can be bullies, Logan said after reviewing her documents. But they're not above the law. If what you're saying checks out, they've got no legal grounds to claim your property. We just need to prove it. What about the revised map they're using? Emma asked. Logan frowned as he studied the map. This looks off. The lines are inconsistent with the original deed. And this date, he pointed to a stamp in the corner. This map was filed less than a month ago. That's a red flag. I'll need to dig into the records to see if there's anything suspicious about how it was approved. Emma left Logan's office feeling a glimmer of hope. For the first time, she felt like she had a chance to fight back, but the feeling was short-lived. When she returned home, she found her garden in shambles. Someone had trampled her flowers, overturned pots, and broken the small wooden trellis she had built by hand. A crude message was scrawled in the dirt, "Mind your own business." Emma's hands trembled as she snapped photos of the damage. Whoever was doing this wasn't just trying to intimidate her, they were trying to break her resolve. But instead of scaring her off, it only fueled her determination. She installed her new security cameras that evening, making sure they covered every corner of her property. As she adjusted the angle of the last camera, she whispered to herself, "You picked the wrong person to mess with." Emma didn't know who was behind the threats and vandalism, but she was determined to find out. Between the legal battle and the escalating harassment, she was in for the fight of her life. The following morning, Emma woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. A string of notifications filled the screen: emails, texts, and a few voicemails, all related to the HOA. She groaned, rubbing her temples, but opened the emails first. What she saw made her stomach drop. The HOA had issued a formal complaint against her for obstructing a community improvement project. The email stated that she had violated the association's rules by refusing to comply with directives, and that additional fines had been assessed to her account. They now totaled over $1,500. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was a full-scale attack. Still wearing her pajamas, she walked outside to get some air. The sight of her backyard made her heart sink further. The construction crew had returned and was now digging up the ground along the fence line, this time using larger equipment. The noise was deafening, and the smell of diesel fuel hung heavy in the air. Before she could stop herself, Emma marched straight to the foreman. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the clatter of machinery. The foreman barely looked at her. "Just following the HOA's orders, Mom." They expanded the project scope. "We're prepping the area for paving." "Paving?" Emma's voice rose. "You're not just putting up a fence anymore." "No, ma'am," the foreman said, adjusting his hard hat. "This area is being converted into a walking path and seating area. Nice addition for the neighborhood, don't you think?" Emma's hands clenched into fists. "This is my property. You can't just." He cut her off with a shrug. "Take it up with the HOA." Fuming, Emma stormed back inside and called Logan, her lawyer. "They're digging up my yard now," she blurted as soon as he answered. "They're turning it into a path and seating area. Can they even do that?" Logan's calm voice steadied her nerves. "Not if the land legally belongs to you." "Did you get any updated documents or permits from them?" "Nothing. Just threats and fines," Emma said, pacing her living room. "Good. That works in our favor," Logan replied. "They're escalating without proper authorization. It strengthens your case. I've been digging into the map revisions and found some irregularities. There's a gap in the documentation trail, which means they might have pushed this through without proper approval." Emma felt a flicker of hope. "What do we do next?" "I'll file a formal cease and desist order," Logan said. "It'll temporarily halt construction until we can present the inconsistencies to a judge, but you need to document everything. Take photos, videos, anything you can. The more evidence, the better." As Emma hung up, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She grabbed her phone and spent the next hour walking around her property, photographing every angle of the construction and the damage to her yard. She recorded the workers as they dug trenches and poured concrete, capturing their blatant disregard for her protests. That evening, she reviewed the footage from her security cameras. To her shock, one of the recordings from the previous night showed two people sneaking into her yard. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but they were clearly tampering with her property, kicking over pots and scattering dirt. One of them even spray-painted a crude symbol on the side of her shed, a mocking grin with jagged teeth. Emma saved the footage and emailed it to Logan, attaching a message. "This is what I'm dealing with." The next morning, Emma noticed something odd as she stepped outside to get her mail. Her mailbox had been knocked off its post and lay crumpled on the ground. A bright yellow HOA notice was taped to her door, accusing her of intimidating construction workers and threatening further action if she didn't cease disruptive behavior. Emma tore the notice down, her anger now boiling over. When she checked her phone, she saw another voicemail from Pauline. She hesitated for a moment before pressing play. "Emma, this is Pauline," the message began, her tone dripping with condescension. "We've received several complaints about your behavior. I understand this transition can be difficult, but as a member of this community, you're obligated to comply with the HOA's decisions. Refusal to do so will only escalate the situation, and I'd hate to see it come to that. Let's try to work together," shall we?" Emma's jaw tightened as she deleted the message. "Work together," she muttered under her breath. "You've got to be kidding me." Over the next few days, the harassment continued. Emma found her trash cans overturned, her garden tools missing, and even her car keyed while parked in her driveway. The tension was suffocating, and the once tranquil neighborhood now felt hostile and oppressive. Jeff, her neighbor, stopped by one evening, glancing nervously over his shoulder before speaking. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said. "Gee, thanks for the pep talk," Emma replied dryly. Jeff shifted uncomfortably. "I'm serious. Pauline's got the board wrapped around her finger. And some of the neighbors? They'll do anything she says if they think it'll keep their dues low or get them out of trouble." Emma crossed her arms. "And you? Where do you stand?" Jeff hesitated, then sighed. "I don't like what she's doing, but I've got my own problems. I can't afford to get on her bad side." "So you're just going to sit back and let this happen?" Emma asked, her frustration evident. Jeff looked away. "Sorry, Emma. You're on your own with this one." As Jeff walked away, Emma felt a pang of disappointment. It was clear that Pauline had created an atmosphere of fear and control, where neighbors were too intimidated to stand up for themselves or anyone else. But Emma refused to back down. With Logan's help, she filed the cease and desist order and submitted her evidence to the local court. While waiting for a response, she continued documenting every noise complaint, every piece of vandalism, every confrontation with the construction crew. One night, as Emma reviewed her camera footage again, she noticed something strange. A black SUV had parked near her house multiple times over the past week, always idling for several minutes before driving off. It wasn't a neighbor's car, and its repeated presence made her uneasy. Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. The next time she spotted the SUV, she grabbed her phone and approached it, recording as she walked. As she neared, the driver rolled down the window just enough to speak. "You should drop this," the man said, his voice low and steady. "Who are you?" Emma demanded, holding her phone steady. "Just a friend," he replied. "A friend with good advice. Walk away before things get worse." The SUV sped off before Emma could respond, leaving her standing in the street, heart pounding. She realized then that this fight was bigger than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about her backyard or the HOA's overreach. There were deeper, more dangerous forces at play, and Emma was determined to uncover them no matter the cost. Emma's determination to fight the HOA only grew after the encounter with the SUV, but the incident left her uneasy. She had underestimated the lengths to which Pauline and her allies would go. The battle was no longer just about her yard, it was about standing up to an oppressive system and uncovering the truth behind their actions. The following day, Emma met with Logan to discuss the cease and desist order they had filed. Logan looked exhausted, but there was a glimmer of optimism in his expression. The judge approved the temporary halt on construction, he said, sliding the court order across the table. "This means they can't proceed with the walking path until the dispute is resolved in court." Emma felt a wave of relief, though it was short-lived. "Do you think they'll actually stop?" she asked. Logan hesitated. "Legally, they have to. But HOAs like this tend to play dirty. We need to be ready for them to push back." Emma nodded. "I've been documenting everything. The vandalism, the intimidation, the letters, I have it all." Logan leaned back in his chair. "Good. That's going to be crucial. But there's something else we need to talk about." He pulled out a copy of the revised property map. "I've been digging into how this map was approved. Normally, changes like these require a public notice period and a homeowner vote, but the HOA skipped both steps. Instead, they pushed it through as a maintenance adjustment. That's not just unethical, it's illegal." Emma's heart raced. How did they get away with it? Logan tapped the paper. "They had help. I found records showing that Pauline worked with a city planner to rush the approval process. That planner has ties to Pauline's brother, Richard Grant, who owns a development company. It's starting to look like this walking path is a front for something much bigger. Emma narrowed her eyes. Let me guess. Richard wants my yard for a new project. Logan nodded. Most likely. I checked public records, and Richard recently filed a proposal for a mixed-use development in this area. Your property would provide critical access for construction equipment. Without it, the project is dead in the water. Emma sat back, stunned by the revelation. Her yard wasn't just a convenient target for a walking path, it was a keystone in a larger scheme. So they're trying to bully me out of my land to line their pockets, she said bitterly. Exactly, Logan replied. But now that we know their motive, we can use it to build your case. If we can prove that Pauline and Richard abused their positions for personal gain, it'll blow their entire operation apart. Emma left Logan's office feeling both energized and apprehensive. The stakes had risen, and the opposition was far more formidable than she had imagined. But she wasn't about to back down. That evening, she reviewed the footage from her security cameras and noticed something that made her stomach twist. 2 figures had entered her yard again, this time under the cover of heavy rain. They carried flashlights and appeared to be searching for something near the shed. One of them kicked over a potted plant, revealing a metallic object embedded in the soil. The pair inspected it briefly before leaving. Emma went outside the next morning to investigate. Sure enough, the plant had been uprooted, and a strange metal tag was half buried in the dirt. She dug it out and examined it closely. The tag had a series of numbers etched onto it, along with the name of a chemical company Emma didn't recognize. She brought the tag to Logan, who raised an eyebrow as he inspected it. This doesn't look like anything related to the walking path, he said. It could be from old construction, or something else. Something else like what? Emma asked, her unease growing. Logan shrugged. Hard to say without more context. I'll see what I can dig up. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Logan filed additional motions to strengthen their case, while Emma continued documenting everything happening around her property. Meanwhile, the construction crew disappeared, presumably in response to the court order. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt like she had a moment to breathe. But that reprieve didn't last long. Late one night, Emma heard voices outside her window. Peering through the curtains, she saw a group of people gathered near the fence line. One of them was Pauline, her voice sharp and commanding even from a distance. Emma couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tension in their body language was clear. Emma grabbed her phone and recorded the scene, her pulse quickening as she watched Pauline point toward her yard. One of the men in the group nodded and began gesturing to the others. Within minutes, the group dispersed, leaving Emma with more questions than answers. The following morning, she received another letter from the HOA. This one accused her of violating community decorum by hosting unauthorized surveillance on her property. The letter threatened additional fines and warned her against provoking unnecessary conflict. Emma couldn't believe the audacity of it. She forwarded the letter to Logan, who called her almost immediately. They're trying to intimidate you into backing off, he said. Don't let them. This letter is meaningless. They can't fine you for protecting your property. But the intimidation tactics didn't stop there. Over the next week, Emma noticed a black SUV parked near her house on multiple occasions. The driver never got out, but the vehicle's presence felt deliberate. It was a silent reminder that she was being watched. Things escalated further when Emma received a visit from a city inspector. The man, dressed in a rumpled suit, claimed he was there to investigate complaints about illegal structures on her property. When Emma demanded to see the complaints, the inspector hesitated before producing a flimsy document with vague accusations. Emma didn't buy it for a second. This is just more HOA nonsense, she said, crossing her arms. The inspector gave her a thin smile. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. Your job, Emma shot back, is being used as a pawn in Pauline's game. Tell her it's not going to work. The inspector left without further comment, but Emma felt the walls closing in. The HOA's campaign against her was relentless, and it was becoming clear that they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But Emma had no intention of giving in. She met with Logan again and showed him the footage of Pauline near her yard. This proves she's directly involved, Emma said. She's not just overseeing the project, she's orchestrating everything. Logan nodded. This strengthens our case, but we need more. If we can tie her actions to Richard's development plans, we'll have a smoking gun. Emma thought back to the metal tag she had found. What if there's something buried on my property that ties them to illegal activity? Could that be why they're pushing so hard to take my yard? It's possible, Logan said, his expression thoughtful. We'll need to dig deeper literally and figuratively. The idea of uncovering buried secrets both terrified and thrilled Emma. If Pauline and Richard were hiding something, she was determined to find it. The battle for her yard was far from over, but Emma knew she was closing in on the truth. Emma's fight against the HOA had taken a dark turn. Every step forward seemed to provoke a stronger, more invasive response. The cease and desist order had temporarily halted construction, but it had done little to stop Pauline and her allies. Instead, the intimidation tactics escalated. The black sub became a regular fixture on her street, and now it wasn't just parked nearby, it had started following her whenever she left the house. Late one evening, as she returned home from a quick grocery run, the SUV's headlights illuminated her driveway. Emma parked and sat frozen in her car, gripping the wheel tightly. The sub idled for several seconds before slowly pulling away. It didn't speed off, didn't turn abruptly, just crawled away, as if deliberately making its presence known. She finally exhaled when the vehicle was out of sight. The fear it instilled in her was undeniable, but so was her determination. "You want me scared," she muttered under her breath. "Not going to happen." The next morning brought another unwelcome surprise. Emma stepped outside to find her garden defaced again. This time it was worse. Her security cameras had been torn down, their cables severed. Her flower beds were completely trampled, and a pile of broken glass had been dumped near her patio door. She clenched her fists as she surveyed the destruction, her heart pounding with anger. Whoever was behind this had gone from passive threats to outright destruction. Logan arrived later that day, visibly concerned when he saw the damage. "They're trying to rattle you," he said, kneeling to inspect the severed camera cables. "They're hoping you'll throw in the towel. They're wasting their time." Emma snapped, though her voice wavered slightly. "If anything, this just proves I'm getting under their skin." Logan nodded but looked uneasy. "I've been digging into Richard's development plans. There's something strange about the timing. The HOA only pushed through the walking path project after Richard's proposal stalled in the city council. It's almost like they're clearing a path literally to keep his project alive." Emma frowned. "So they're banking on getting my land to move forward." "Exactly," Logan said. "The development plans include a parking structure that would sit right where your property line currently is. Without it, the rest of the project doesn't work. That's why they're so desperate to control your yard." The revelation gave Emma a sense of clarity. This wasn't just a power play, it was a calculated move to enrich Richard at the expense of her home and peace of mind. "They're not just trying to take my land," she said. "They're covering up how far they're willing to go to get it." Determined to expose the truth, Emma contacted a local journalist, Lisa Bennett, who had a reputation for uncovering corruption in small towns. Emma explained the situation and shared her evidence, the vandalism, the shady map revisions, and the ties between Pauline and Richard. Lisa was immediately intrigued. "This is exactly the kind of story that needs daylight," Lisa said. "But if we're going to run it, I need more than accusations. I need proof." Emma agreed to let Lisa investigate further, hoping that media attention might pressure Pauline into backing down. But as the story began to take shape, Emma's situation worsened. One evening she found an anonymous note taped to her door. Written in block letters, it read, "Call off the press or you'll regret it." She photographed the note and sent it to Logan and Lisa, both of whom urged her to report it to the police. The officers who arrived were polite but non-committal, promising to keep an eye on the situation without offering much in the way of tangible help. That night, Emma sat in her living room, replaying the events of the past few weeks in her mind. The threats, the vandalism, the surveillance had all pointed to one thing: Pauline and Richard were scared. They were losing control of their narrative, and Emma's refusal to back down had put them on edge. But even with that small victory, Emma knew she couldn't let her guard down. The next day she decided to confront Pauline directly. Armed with copies of her documents and a burning sense of injustice, Emma walked into the HOA's office unannounced. Pauline sat behind her desk, her expression icy as Emma entered. "Miss Holmes," she said, her voice laced with condescension, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Emma dropped the stack of papers onto Pauline's desk. "These are my property documents. They prove that your revised map is fraudulent." Pauline barely glanced at the papers. "The HOA has already reviewed your claims, Emma. As I've said before, our actions are entirely within the law." "Then explain the vandalism," Emma shot back. "Explain the threats. Explain why your brother's development depends on stealing my land." Pauline's eyes flickered, a crack in her otherwise composed demeanor. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, though her tone was less confident. "Sure you don't," Emma said, leaning in. "But here's the thing, you're running out of time. I've got a journalist digging into your connections. I've got a lawyer who's found every hole in your so-called legal process. And I've got cameras watching everything. So go ahead, keep playing your games. It's only going to make the fallout worse for you." Pauline didn't respond immediately. She sat back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the desk. For a moment, Emma thought she might finally crack, but instead, Pauline gave her a thin smile. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You think you're in control, but you're not. The HOA always wins, Emma. You'll learn that the hard way." Emma left the office with a mixture of anger and triumph. Pauline's facade was slipping, and it was clear she was feeling the pressure. But Emma also knew that Pauline wasn't bluffing about the lengths she was willing to go. Over the next few days, the pressure on Emma intensified. The journalist, Lisa, uncovered more damning information, emails between Pauline and Richard discussing the walking path as a necessary acquisition for the development project. One email even mentioned plans to handle uncooperative homeowners. But with each new piece of evidence, the retaliation against Emma grew worse. Her car was broken into, and her tires were slashed. Her power went out one night, leaving her house in darkness just as the black SUV rolled past her window. Emma didn't sleep that night, clutching a flashlight and a heavy wrench as she sat in her living room, waiting for something or someone to make a move. Logan called her the next morning with news that was equal parts encouraging and terrifying. "We have enough to take this to court," he said. "The emails alone prove they're abusing their power. But this is going to get ugly, Emma. Once we file, they'll throw everything they have at you." Emma's voice was steady as she replied, "Let them. I'm not backing down." The battle was coming to a head, and Emma knew she had one chance to expose Pauline and Richard's corruption for good. She was prepared to fight with everything she had, no matter the cost. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table beside Logan, her lawyer, clutching a thick binder of evidence that represented weeks of relentless work. Across the room, Pauline sat flanked by her attorney and Richard Grant, her developer brother. Pauline's usual air of smug confidence was replaced by a tense, calculated demeanor, though she occasionally shot Emma a withering glare. Logan leaned over and whispered, "This is it. Stay calm and let the evidence speak for itself." The judge, a stern-looking woman with piercing eyes, called the court to order. Logan opened the proceedings by presenting the most damning pieces of evidence. He started with the inconsistencies in the property maps, highlighting how the HOA's revised boundaries conflicted with the original deed. He then introduced testimony from a city official who confirmed that the easement changes had bypassed standard procedures. "Your Honor," Logan said, gesturing toward a projection of Pauline's emails on the screen, "these communications between the defendant and her brother, Richard Grant, clearly demonstrate a coordinated effort to seize the plaintiff's property under false pretenses. The so-called walking path was never intended for community use. It was a calculated move to benefit Mr. Grant's development project." The courtroom murmured as Logan walked the judge through the emails. One particularly damning message from Pauline read, "We need this land secured ASAP. Emma's resistance is a problem, but I'll handle it." Another message from Richard outlined plans to use the walking path to stage construction equipment for his proposed parking structure. When it was Pauline's attorney's turn to respond, he argued that the HOA had acted within its rights under the bylaws and that the emails had been misinterpreted. Pauline herself took the stand and attempted to portray Emma as a troublesome homeowner who had refused to cooperate for the greater good of the community. "This is not about personal gain," Pauline said with a carefully measured tone. "This is about improving our neighborhood. Holmes has chosen to misrepresent our intentions to avoid following the rules, which she agreed to when she purchased her home." Logan quickly dismantled her narrative during cross-examination. "Ms. Grant, if this project was about community improvement, why were no public meetings held to discuss it? Why was the easement approved in private without notifying the affected homeowner?" Pauline hesitated, her polished composure faltering for a split second. "It was an expedited process. There wasn't time for a full review." Logan seized on her admission. "So you bypassed the required process to push this project through. Would you say that's standard practice for the HOA?" Pauline stiffened, but before she could answer, Logan added, "And is it also standard practice to intimidate homeowners with vandalism, anonymous threats, and false accusations?" Pauline's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge looked pointedly at Pauline, her expression unreadable but sharp. The turning point came when Lisa Bennett, the journalist Emma had contacted, testified about the emails and the results of her independent investigation. She revealed that Richard Grant's development company had a pattern of targeting vulnerable properties in HOA-managed neighborhoods, using similar tactics to force homeowners out. "The evidence we've gathered shows a troubling pattern," Lisa concluded. "This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a broader scheme to exploit HOA authority for financial gain." When the defense called Richard to testify, he tried to downplay his involvement, claiming he had no control over the HOA's decisions. But Logan was ready. "Mr. Grant," Logan began, holding up one of the emails, "this message from you to Ms. Grant references handling the home situation. What exactly did you mean by that?" Richard stammered. I was just offering advice. I wasn't directly involved." Logan's voice hardened. "So you weren't involved when your company filed a development proposal that relied on an easement running directly through Ms. Holmes's property? You weren't involved when your sister coordinated efforts to rezone that property without her consent?" Richard's face reddened, and he avoided eye contact. "It wasn't like that." By the end of the day, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge announced she would issue her decision after a short recess, leaving the courtroom buzzing with anticipation. Emma sat quietly, trying to steady her breathing. When the judge returned, her verdict was swift and decisive. She ruled in Emma's favor, declaring the HOA's revised property map null and void. She also ordered the immediate removal of the partially constructed walking path and imposed a substantial fine on the HOA for violating legal procedures. As for Pauline and Richard, the judge referred the matter to the district attorney's office for further investigation into potential fraud and abuse of power. Emma felt a rush of relief as the ruling sank in. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, and Pauline's lawyer leaned in to whisper something to her, but she waved him off, her face pale and furious. Logan turned to Emma with a rare smile. "We did it." As they left the courthouse, Emma noticed several reporters waiting outside. Lisa Bennett approached her first, microphone in hand. "Emma, any comment on today's ruling?" Emma took a deep breath and said, "This wasn't just about my yard. It was about standing up to people who think they're untouchable. HOAs are supposed to protect communities, not exploit them. I hope this sends a message to anyone facing the same kind of abuse. You can fight back and you can win." The cameras flashed as Lisa nodded, clearly satisfied with the quote. Emma walked away, feeling the weight of the past few months finally beginning to lift. The fight had cost her more than she had anticipated, but in that moment she knew it had been worth it. The truth was out, and justice had been served. In the weeks following the court's decision, Emma's life began to return to a semblance of normalcy, though the scars of her battle with the HOA lingered. The construction crew removed the partially built walking path and dismantled the invasive fence under the supervision of city officials, ensuring that her property boundaries were fully restored. Watching the last section of fencing hauled away felt like a small but significant victory, a reminder that she had reclaimed what was rightfully hers. Pauline Grant resigned as president of the HOA within days of the ruling. Her public downfall was swift and merciless. Local media reports highlighted the corruption and mismanagement that had plagued the association under her leadership, and neighbors who had once stayed silent began sharing their own grievances. The HOA board was forced to reorganize, and new members promised greater transparency and a commitment to rebuilding trust within the community. Richard Grant's development project, meanwhile, was officially scrapped. Investigations into his dealings uncovered a network of questionable transactions, and his company faced multiple lawsuits from other homeowners who claimed to have been similarly targeted. Emma found a grim satisfaction in knowing that their schemes had unraveled, exposing the greed and deceit they had tried so hard to conceal. Despite her victory, Emma's relationship with her neighbors remained strained. Some quietly avoided her, ashamed of how they had turned a blind eye to the HOA's actions. Others approached her with tentative apologies, admitting they had been too scared to stand up for her themselves. One evening, Jeff, the neighbor who had initially warned her about Pauline's influence, stopped by her house. He stood awkwardly on her porch, holding a potted plant as a peace offering. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low. "I should have done more to help. You were fighting for all of us, and I just sat back." Emma accepted the plant with a small smile. "It's okay, Jeff. Fear makes people do strange things. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't let bullies like Pauline win. You have to fight back." Her words seemed to resonate with him, and over time other neighbors began reaching out as well. Gradually, Emma found herself becoming a symbol of resilience within the community. People started asking for her advice on how to handle HOA disputes, and some even suggested she run for a position on the newly reformed board. Emma politely declined, wanting to focus on reclaiming her sense of peace. Her yard, once a battleground, was now a place of healing. She spent hours replanting her garden, repairing the damage, and adding new touches that made the space feel whole again. Each flower that bloomed felt like a quiet triumph, a reminder of everything she had fought for. One sunny afternoon, Emma hosted a small gathering in her backyard. It wasn't a grand event, just a few neighbors, some snacks, and the soothing sound of wind chimes swaying in the breeze. As laughter filled the air, she felt a sense of belonging that had eluded her during the turmoil of the past few months. Her phone buzzed with a message from Logan. "Another HOA case coming my way. Thanks for setting the precedent." She laughed softly and set the phone aside, feeling a wave of gratitude for the people who had helped her along the way. Emma knew that the battle with the HOA had changed her. She had entered the fight as someone who just wanted to protect her home and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in her ability to stand up for herself. The experience had been grueling, but it had also shown her what she was capable of. As the sun set over her garden, casting golden light across the vibrant blooms, Emma leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. Her yard was quiet, peaceful, and entirely her own again, a sanctuary that no one could take from her. For the first time in months, she felt at ease, ready to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose and strength.